For 20 years, I paid for every Thanksgiving. The hall, the food, the flowers, all of it out of my own account, while my son-in-law grabbed the card and took the credit. This year, I closed that account. And when I walked through that door later that night, my own daughter turned to face me in front of the whole room. "You ruin everything. You always have." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. Because what came next cost my family everything they had built on my silence. I'm incredibly grateful to have you here tonight. Which city or country are you watching from? Drop a comment below. Also, please note this story includes some fictional elements added for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to names or settings is purely coincidental, but the message conveyed is highly useful. Carol died on a Tuesday. I remember that detail the way you remember the small, useless things your brain decides to hold on to when the big ones are too heavy to carry. It was a Tuesday in October. The leaves were coming down hard outside the window of room 214 at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, and the nurse who came in to tell me had a coffee stain on the left sleeve of her scrubs that I could not stop looking at. 31 years we had been married. She was 53 years old. Our daughter Valerie was 18, just starting her first semester at a state college 2 hours away. Our son Danny was 14 and sitting in the waiting room down the hall, still in his school clothes, still holding the math textbook he had been doing homework from when I called and told him to come to the hospital fast. I walked out of that room and into the hallway and told my kids their mother was gone. Valerie grabbed my arm and started sobbing so hard her whole body shook. Danny, my quiet 14-year-old boy, walked straight into my chest and held on, and I stood there in that hallway with both of my children pressed against me, and I made them a promise I did not say out loud. I am going to keep this family together, whatever it takes, however long it takes. That promise cost me 20 years. Here is what you have to understand about a man like me. I grew up in a small town. My father worked with his hands. His father worked with his hands. I learned early on that love is not something you say, it is something you do. You show up. You fix what is broken. You keep the lights on literally and every other way. Carol had been the warmth of our house. She was the one who remembered everyone's birthday, who made the kitchen smell like something worth coming home to, who knew which of the kids needed a hug and which one needed space. When she died, all of that warmth just stopped. So I did what I knew how to do. I kept the lights on. I kept paying the bills. I kept driving Danny to school. I kept showing up to Valerie's college on parent weekends, even though I had nothing interesting to say at the faculty dinners she dragged me to. And every November, I kept Thanksgiving alive because Carol had loved Thanksgiving the way some people love a religion. The first year without her, I booked a private dining room at a restaurant downtown. Nothing fancy, just enough space for the family and a few of Carol's closest friends. I paid for everything and told no one what it cost. The second year, Valerie said she wanted something bigger. A real venue with proper catering somewhere people could dress up and feel like the holiday actually meant something. She had already found the place. A restaurant called The Harmon Room, one of the nicest spots in our part of Tennessee. White tablecloths, candlelight, a staff that actually knew what they were doing. She slid the printed quote across my kitchen table like she was presenting a business proposal. I looked at the number at the bottom. It was steep. "I can cover it," I said, because that was what I said. That was what I always said. What I did not say, what it took me nearly 2 decades to finally admit, was that I was terrified. Not of the cost, of what would happen if I stopped. If I stopped paying, would they stop coming? Would the holidays disappear the way Carol had disappeared? Would the family I was holding together with both hands finally fall apart? I opened the joint checking account the following January. The idea seemed practical at the time. I put money in every month, a steady amount, consistent the way I did everything. The account was meant to cover family expenses, the grandchildren's school supplies, when they came along, the holiday gatherings, medical costs, if anyone needed help. I added Valerie as a co-owner because she was the oldest, because she was organized, because she had a clipboard and a plan for everything, and because I trusted her. She was my daughter. Of course I trusted her. What I did not do, and this is the part that took me a long time to say out loud, was read the statements. For the first 2 years I checked occasionally. Things looked fine. Money went in, money went out. And Thanksgiving happened every November like clockwork. By year 3, I had stopped checking altogether. I had my pension coming in on the 1st of every month. I added to the account on the 15th. I assumed whatever was happening in between was exactly what I had intended it for. I was a man who had spent 30 years running wire through walls and reading circuit diagrams. I trusted systems. I had built this one myself. I saw no reason to question it. That is what 20 years of grief will do to a careful man. It will make him stop being careful about the things that hurt too much to look at directly. By the time I finally sat down at my kitchen table that October night in 2025 and actually opened the statement on my laptop, reading through it line by line the way I had not done in nearly 2 decades, my coffee had gone cold beside me. The numbers told a story I had not written. I stared at the screen for a long time. The cursor blinked at the bottom of the page like it was waiting for me to say something. Then I picked up my phone and called Marcus Webb. Before I called Marcus that night, when I sat with the laptop open in front of me for a long time staring at the numbers without really seeing them anymore, my eyes kept drifting to the window above the kitchen sink, to the dark yard outside where my pumpkin vines had finally stopped producing for the season. I kept thinking about the table, not the numbers on the screen. The table, specifically the one they always put me at. Every Thanksgiving for 20 years, the Harmon room set up the same configuration. Long banquet tables down the center of the main dining room, covered in white linen, dressed with candles and flower arrangements that Valerie always took full credit for selecting. And then off to the side near the door that led back to the kitchen, a smaller table. Round, slightly wobbling on one leg, positioned where the waitstaff could brush past it carrying trays without needing to redirect themselves. That was my table. Not because anyone ever said so directly. Nobody handed me a card with my name on it and pointed to the corner. It happened the way a lot of things in my family happened, gradually, without discussion, until one day it was simply the way things were and nobody remembered deciding it. The first few years I told myself it made sense. I was the one who came early to help with setup. The round table was closer to the door, easier for me to slip in and out without disrupting the flow of the evening. Practical. That was how I explained it to myself. By year 5, I had stopped explaining it at all. Here is what those 20 Thanksgivings looked like from my seat near the kitchen door. Valerie at the head of the main table, luminous in whatever she was wearing. Working the room the way a seasoned hostess works a room, laughing at exactly the right moments, touching people's arms when she agreed with them. Steering conversations with the quiet authority of someone who believes she was born to run things. And Julian beside her. Julian Vance, my son-in-law, 40 years old. A commercial real estate broker who treated every social occasion like a transaction he was trying to close. He was broad-shouldered and loud, in the particular way of men who have decided that volume is a substitute for substance. He had a firm handshake, a practiced smile, and an instinct for finding the most important person in any room and planting himself directly in their orbit. He had married Valerie 11 years ago. I had walked her down the aisle myself, and I had meant every step of it. In the early years, I genuinely liked Julian. He was driven. He was good to her, or at least he performed goodness convincingly. And he always grabbed the check. That was the thing about Julian at dinner. The moment a bill materialized anywhere near the table, his hand shot out like a reflex. He would take it with this easy confidence, pull out the card, a sleek matte black credit card that caught the candlelight just so, and hand it to the server with the unhurried assurance of a man who had never once worried about what anything cost. The other guests always noticed. That was the point. Julian, you really do not have to every year, someone would say, and Julian would wave it off with the particular smile of a man performing generosity he has practiced in a mirror. It is the least we can do, he would say. We, always we, as though Valerie had some hand in it beyond booking the event and sending the invitations. I watched this from my round table by the kitchen door, eating my turkey and nodding when someone thought to glance over and include me in a conversation, which was not often. But I watched it year after year, and I never said a word about the card, because I did not know yet what I know now. I did not know it was mine. The one evening I want to tell you about specifically is last Thanksgiving, November of 2024, about a year before all of this came to a head. It was a night like every other night at the Harmon Room, right up until the moment Thomas Harper walked in. Thomas Harper was our neighbor, had been for going on 15 years. He lived in the big colonial revival at the end of Sycamore Drive, the one with the iron gate and the half-acre of Kentucky bluegrass that his groundskeeping crew manicured twice a week. He was in his mid-60s, silver-haired, the kind of quietly wealthy that does not need to announce itself, because everyone already knows. He had made his money in manufacturing textile mills mostly spread across 3 states. I had done electrical work for one of those mills for the better part of a decade. That was the thing about Thomas Harper that Julian never quite understood. Harper did not respect Julian's handshakes, or his matte black card, or his talk about commercial real estate projections in the greater Nashville corridor. Harper was a man who respected work, actual work, the kind that leaves calluses and a body that aches at the end of the day. He and I had something Julian could not manufacture. When Harper came through the door of the Harmon Room that evening, he scanned the room the way men like him do, taking inventory without appearing to. And when his eyes landed on me, sitting at my round table near the kitchen door, his whole face shifted. He cut straight across the room, past Valerie, past Julian, who was already angling toward him with his hand extended, and he came directly to me. "Arthur Chandler," he said. And he took my hand in both of his, the way he always did, the grip of a man who actually means it. "How is that knee holding up? You mentioned it was giving you trouble last spring." I told him it was better. He pulled out the chair across from me, sat down without being invited, and we talked for 20 minutes about nothing in particular. The drought that had hit the county that summer. A diner that had closed down on Route 41 that we had both eaten at for years. Whether the high school football team had any business being as good as they were this season. 20 minutes. Just 2 men talking. From the corner of my eye, I could see Julian hovering at the edge of our conversation, waiting for a pause long enough to insert himself. His smile had gone a little tight around the edges, the way it did when a room was not organizing itself the way he had planned. Harper finally stood, clapped me once on the shoulder, firm, warm, the kind of contact that means something, and said, "Good to see you, Arthur. The work you did on that mill's electrical system 20 years ago is still running clean. I want you to know that." Then he turned and greeted Julian with a nod. Polite. Nothing more. Julian laughed a little too loudly at something Harper said as he walked away, and I watched my son-in-law's jaw tighten in the way it did when he felt he had been outranked by someone who was not even trying to outrank him. I drank my coffee. I went back to my table by the kitchen door. And I thought, as I had thought many times before, that one day something about all of this was going to crack wide open. I just did not know then how right I was. The first week of November in Tennessee has a particular kind of cold to it. Not the hard-biting cold of January, but something sneakier. It comes in through the gaps around the window frames and settles low along the floorboards. And if you are the kind of man who has lived alone for 20 years, you notice it in ways you did not when the house was full. I noticed it on a Saturday morning when Valerie stopped by. She came to pick up some of Carol's old decorative pieces, a pair of brass candlesticks and a painted ceramic turkey that Carol had bought at a craft fair sometime in the 90s and brought out every November without fail. Valerie had asked about them the week before, She wanted to use them as part of the centerpiece arrangement at the Harmon Room this year. A tribute to her mother, she said. I had them packed in a box by the time she knocked. She came in for maybe 15 minutes, moving through my kitchen the way she always did, quickly, efficiently, her eyes cataloging the room like she was taking inventory of a property she intended to list. She hugged me once, brief, and practiced the kind of hug that checks a box without really landing anywhere. She took the box, told me she was running late, and was out the door before I had finished pouring my second cup of coffee. Her bag stayed behind. It was a large tan leather tote, the kind with 2 handles and a magnetic clasp sitting right there on the kitchen chair she had pulled out and then forgotten to push back in. I picked it up to set it by the door in case she turned around, and when I lifted it, the clasp came open and several papers slid out onto the floor. I crouched down to gather them. Most were receipts, a grocery list, a folded brochure from a florist on the east side of town. And then near the bottom of the pile, a single sheet of paper that had been folded in thirds and then unfolded and refolded so many times, the creases had gone soft. It was a seating chart, a hand-drawn diagram of the Harmon Room's main dining floor laid out in Valerie's neat, careful handwriting. The long center tables were labeled with names I recognized: family, a few of Julian's business contacts, the Harpers near the head. Everything was organized with the precision of someone who had been planning this for weeks. And then, off to the side of the diagram, near a small rectangle she had labeled kitchen access door, there was a single circle, smaller than the others, drawn in pencil rather than pen, like it had been added as an afterthought. My name was written inside it, and beside it in handwriting that was unmistakably Valerie's, a note. It read, "Put Dad here with the little ones. Keep him away from the Harper table. Last thing we need is him talking shop with Thomas and embarrassing everyone." My chest tightened so sharply, I actually pressed my hand flat against it, the way you do when something catches you off guard and your body reacts before your mind has a chance to catch up. I read the note a second time, then a third. I was not surprised. That was the part that hurt the most. I was not even close to surprised. I folded the paper back along its worn creases, tucked it carefully into the bag with the other papers, pressed the magnetic clasp shut, and set the bag by the front door. Then I stood in my kitchen for a moment, breathing slowly, looking at the chair Valerie had pushed back and forgotten to return to the table. I pushed it in myself. An hour later, I loaded 6 pumpkins from my backyard garden into the bed of my truck and drove to Valerie's house. I had grown them from seed back in July, big ones deep orange, the kind Carol used to line up along the porch steps every fall. I brought them over every year. It was one of the small things I still did without being asked. Nobody answered the front door when I knocked, but I could hear voices coming from the back of the house, so I walked around the side past the gate that was always left unlatched toward the backyard patio where Valerie kept her outdoor furniture even after the weather turned. I came around the corner of the house and stopped. Julian was out there with Thomas Harper. They were standing near the gas fire pit, each of them holding a drink, deep in the kind of conversation that men have when they believe no one important is listening. Harper's wife, Mildred, was not with him. Just the two of them, the fire going low, the late afternoon light coming through the oak trees in long, pale strips. I was perhaps 15 feet away on the other side of the cedar fence, half hidden by the corner of the house. I had not announced myself yet. And before I could, Julian spoke. "Honestly, Thomas, between you and me, these dinners run so much better when we keep the old man on a short leash." Julian's voice had that particular quality it got when he was performing for an audience he wanted to impress, louder than necessary, every word shaped for effect. "He means well, God bless him, but he is an electrician. You put him at the main table, and he starts telling stories about pulling wire in somebody's basement, and suddenly, the whole evening goes sideways." Harper made a sound that was not quite agreement, a neutral sound. Julian pressed on, warming to it. "Valerie handles everything. The venue, the catering, the whole production. I handle the finances. Arthur shows up, eats his turkey, and we all smile for the photos. That is the system. It works. My hands tightened around the stems of the pumpkins I was still carrying. And then I heard my daughter's voice. Valerie had come out through the back door without me seeing her, and she was standing just behind Julian now, close enough to have heard every word. She looked at Harper with a bright hostess smile and laughed that easy, delighted laugh she used at parties, the one that lit up her whole face. "He means well," she said, echoing Julian's words like they were the most reasonable thing in the world. "We love him, we do. He just gets a little lost at these big events." Thomas Harper lifted his glass, looked out across the yard, and did not say a word. I set the pumpkins down in the grass on my side of the fence. I set them down quietly without a sound. Then I walked back to my truck, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway. My hands were steady on the wheel. My jaw was tight enough to ache. That night when I got home, I did not eat dinner. I sat in Carol's old chair in the living room, the wingback one by the window that nobody ever sat in anymore, because it had always been hers, and I stayed there until it was dark outside. Then I got up, went to the kitchen, and called Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb's office was on the third floor of a brick building downtown that had been a cotton warehouse sometime before the Civil War, and had since become floor by floor a law firm, a title company, and a small accounting practice. Marcus occupied the corner suite on the third floor, the one with the tall windows that looked out over the river. He had been there for going on 25 years. I had known Marcus since we were both 22 years old, working summer construction on the same crew outside of Murfreesboro. He had gone on to law school. I had gone on to electrician's apprenticeship. We had stayed close the way men stay close when they have shared enough bad weather and cheap coffee to trust each other without needing a reason. When Carol died, Marcus handled all the paperwork, the estate, the accounts, the small details that accumulate around a person's life and need tending after they are gone. He did it without billing me a single hour, and when I tried to pay him anyway, he told me to buy him dinner sometime, and we would call it even. I had bought him a lot of dinners over the years. He was at his desk when I came in Monday morning reading something on his computer, with his glasses pushed down his nose the way he always wore them. He was 63, lean, with the kind of face that had gotten more honest-looking, as he aged, deeper lines, steadier eyes. The face of a man who had spent decades sitting across tables from people in difficult situations and had learned not to flinch at much. He looked up when I came through the door and read my expression in about 3 seconds. "Sit down, Arthur," he said, and he closed whatever he had been reading. I sat down. I told him everything. The seating chart, the note in Valerie's handwriting, what I had heard Julian say behind the cedar fence, the statement I had finally opened after 20 years of looking away. I laid it out in the order it had happened, without editorializing. The way you report a problem on a job site. Here is what I found. Here is where I found it. Here is what I think it means. Marcus listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I had always valued about him. He had a yellow legal pad in front of him, and by the time I finished, he had filled half a page with notes. He looked at what he had written for a moment. Then he looked at me over the top of his glasses. "The account," he said. "The joint checking account. Do you know the name of the charitable fund they set up, the one Valerie announced last Thanksgiving?" I told him. "The Carol Chandler Scholarship Trust." Marcus turned to his computer and typed for less than a minute. He used a public federal database. He explained this to me as he typed the way he always explained things as he did them matter-of-factly, so I would understand what I was looking at. Any nonprofit organization registered in the United States is required to file paperwork with the IRS and receive what is called an employer identification number. That number goes into a public record that anyone can search. He searched it. He found the filing in under 30 seconds. "Arthur," he said, and his voice had gone careful in the way that meant what he was about to say was going to cost me something. This trust was registered, but it is not operating as a legitimate charitable organization. The filings show that the funds collected donations from family members, contributions from business associates. Whatever was put into this account in Carol's name have been transferred out to a private LLC. The listed recipient is a company called JV Capital Properties. My stomach dropped straight to the floor. Julian Vance, I said. Julian Vance, Marcus confirmed. He took his glasses off and set them on the desk. They used Carol's name to open a collection account, presented it to the family as a scholarship fund, and then moved the money into Julian's real estate company, listed as consulting fees. He paused, letting that land. That is not a gray area, Arthur. That is fraud. Federal fraud because it involves a falsely registered nonprofit and interstate fund transfers. I sat with that for a moment. My hands were folded on my knees, very still, the way they get when I am working through something difficult and do not yet trust myself to move them. How long would it take you to document this properly? I asked. I already have enough to report it, Marcus said. The question is whether you want to report it now or gather more first. More, I said. I want to understand the whole picture before I do anything. He nodded once slowly, like a man who respected that answer. The bank was 4 blocks away. I walked. The branch manager, a woman named Patricia, who had handled my accounts for going on 12 years, sat with me in the small glass office near the back and pulled up the full transaction history on her screen. I had my identification, my account number, and 20 years of legal ownership of that account. I had every right to see every dollar that had ever moved through it. What I saw made my eyes burn. Patricia walked me through it gently, the way someone explains a medical result they wish they were delivering differently. The deposits were mine, consistent, regular, arriving on the 15th of every month like clockwork. The withdrawals were Valerie's. Cash withdrawals at the bank window. Online transfers to accounts I did not recognize. Payments to vendors that did not match anything I had ever authorized. Mr. Chandler, Patricia said carefully. As co-owner of this account, your daughter has had full withdrawal access since the account was opened. Every transaction here was executed legally under her signature or her digital authorization. She hesitated. But I want you to understand that does not mean the money was used for what you intended. I know, I said. I just needed to see it. She turned the monitor slightly so I could see the running total more clearly. 20 years of deposits. 20 years of withdrawals, and at the bottom of the screen, a number. The total that had left this account over 2 decades, not counting what I had put in for legitimate family expenses, sat there in plain black type, steady and indifferent as a circuit diagram that finally explains why the whole system has been failing. It was more money than I had earned in the last 8 years of working. My throat tightened so hard I had to breathe through my nose for a moment to keep my face from doing something I did not want to do in a bank office. I pressed 2 fingers against the edge of the desk, grounding myself against the cool laminate surface, and I stayed very still until the feeling passed. Then I thanked Patricia. I shook her hand. I walked back out into the November air which had gone sharp and bright while I was inside, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, with my hands in my coat pockets. Marcus had said there was more to find. He was right. There was always more. But for right now, standing on that sidewalk with the river 2 blocks away and 20 years of numbers burned into the back of my eyes, I let myself feel the full weight of what I had just learned. Then I straightened up, buttoned my coat against the cold, and started thinking about what came next. 3 days after I walked out of that bank, my phone rang at 9:30 in the morning while I was drinking coffee at the kitchen table. I looked at the screen. Valerie. I answered it. Dad. Her voice was warm and slightly breathless, the particular combination she used when she needed something and wanted you to feel like you were doing her a favor by providing it. I am so glad you picked up. I need to talk to you about Danny. I set my coffee mug down. What about Danny? He is in trouble. She let that sit for just a beat, long enough to land, not long enough for me to ask a question. Financial trouble. He has been too proud to say anything. You know how he is, but I found out through the grapevine, and it is bad, Dad. He has got debts from that transmission job that went sideways last spring, and the creditors are starting to call. My chest tightened with something that was not quite alarm and not quite recognition. Not yet. How much? I asked. $10,000. She said it quickly, cleanly, like she had practiced the number. I know it is a lot. But if we move fast, we can keep it from going to collections and ruining his credit. I can handle the transfer through the joint account. You would not even have to do anything. I just need you to confirm the funds are available. There it was. I had spent 20 years listening to Valerie make requests, and I had learned over time that her requests had a particular architecture to them. They always came wrapped in someone else's need. They always carried a clock move fast act, now do not think too long. And they always ended with a version of you would not even have to do anything. Let me look into it, I said. I will call you back. Dad, the window on this is really, I will call you back, Valerie. I hung up. Then I got in my truck and drove across town to Danny's garage. The place was called Chandler Auto. Danny had put up the sign himself 6 years ago, hand-painted block letters on a piece of reclaimed barn wood, hung it above the bay doors with 2 lag bolts and a level. The sign was slightly crooked, and he had never fixed it, and I had always loved that about him. He was underneath a lifted pickup truck when I pulled in, visible only from the waist down, his boots crossed at the ankle, the way they had been since he was a teenager, lying under Carol's old station wagon, pretending to help me change the oil. Danny? I said. He rolled out on the creeper, blinking against the fluorescent light. He was 34 years old and had his mother's eyes and his grandfather's hands, broad across the knuckles, permanently stained at the creases, with motor oil that soap never quite reached. He sat up when he saw my face. What happened? He said immediately. I told him. Not all of it, not the bank statements, not Marcus, not the seating chart. Just the phone call. Valerie's story about the debts, the $10,000, the request to move fast through the joint account. Danny stared at me for a long moment. Then he stood up from the creeper, and I watched his expression go through 3 different things in about 4 seconds. Confusion first, then a slow, dawning understanding, and then something that looked like a man trying very hard not to say words he could not take back. Dad, he said carefully, I do not have any debts from last spring. The transmission job was fine. I have got maybe $200 on a credit card, and that is it. His jaw was tight. His hands hanging at his sides curled slowly into fists, and then uncurled again, the knuckles going white, and then pink. She used my name, he said. It was not a question. I do not know yet what she intended to do with the money, I said. But she used your name, yes. Danny turned away from me and walked to the workbench along the far wall, bracing both hands against the edge of it, his back to me. His shoulders were up around his ears. I could see him breathing deliberately, the way a person breathes when they are trying to keep something contained. How long has this been going on? He asked, his voice still turned toward the wall. I am still finding out, I said honestly. He turned back around. His eyes were red at the rims, not from crying, but from the particular strain of a man holding back something that wants very badly to come out. What do you need from me, Dad? Nothing yet, I said. I just needed to know if the story was true. It is not true. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and he cleared his throat hard, pushing past it. Not a word of it, I nodded. I told him I believed him. Then I told him to go back to work, that I would handle it, that I would keep him informed when the time was right. He watched me walk back to my truck with an expression I recognized, the same look he had given me at Carol's funeral when he was 14 years old, and did not yet have the words for what he was feeling, but needed me to know he was there. I drove home and called Marcus. Marcus had news of his own. He had been in contact with the legal team at the Harmon Room, not through confrontation, but through a quiet channel that had opened up on its own. 3 months earlier, the restaurant had dismissed their head bookkeeper following an internal audit. Before leaving, that bookkeeper had filed a formal complaint with the restaurant's management alleging irregular billing practices tied to a specific recurring account. Our account. Marcus had obtained the original vendor invoices through a legal records request, the kind of paperwork any attorney can file when building a civil case. He spread the copies across his desk when I came in and walked me through them the same way he had walked me through the IRS filing. The numbers on the invoices I had been charged did not match the numbers on the restaurant's internal records. Every year, the amount billed to your account was inflated by approximately 30% above the actual cost of the event, Marcus said, tapping one finger on the paper. The difference was returned to a private party in cash. The bookkeeper documented 3 years of it before she was let go. I looked at the papers on his desk. Clean official documents numbers lined up in tidy columns. Valerie, I said. That is what the evidence suggests, Marcus said. We would need to trace the cash payments to confirm, but the pattern is consistent and the amounts align. I sat back in the chair and pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes for a moment, hard enough to see stars, the way you do when you need your body to feel something physical so your mind can keep working. Then I dropped my hands and looked at Marcus. Keep going, I said. I want everything. Before I tell you what Ruth brought to my door that Tuesday morning, and what it made me realize I could never take back, drop a number in the comments. Just the number 6. Let me know you are still here with me. Because what comes next changes everything. And a quick note, the story you are hearing contains some fictional elements crafted to bring a deeper truth to life. If that is not something you want to continue with, this is a good place to step away, no hard feelings at all. Ruth Chandler had been my big sister for 61 years, which meant she had seen me at my best and at my worst, and at every unremarkable point in between, and she had never once felt the need to sugarcoat any of it. She showed up at my door on a Tuesday morning 4 days before Thanksgiving without calling ahead. That alone told me something. Ruth always called ahead. She was 65 years old, small and straight-backed, with silver hair she kept short and sharp eyes that had a way of seeing around corners. She was carrying her coat over one arm and a small velvet box in her other hand, and the expression on her face was the one she got when she had been sitting on something difficult for too long and had finally decided to put it down. "Make me some coffee," she said, walking past me into the kitchen. "And sit down. I have got something to show you." I made the coffee. I sat down. Ruth set the velvet box on the table between us. It was dark blue, the size of a ring box, with a small gold hinge on one side that had gone slightly loose with age. I recognized it before she even opened it. I had held that box in my hands on a Tuesday evening in June of 1979 in the parking lot of a jewelry store in downtown Nashville, shaking so hard I had nearly dropped it twice. It was the box Carol's engagement ring had come in. "Open it," Ruth said. I did. The ring inside looked right at first glance. The same simple gold band, the same round stone catching the morning light from the window. But I had spent 31 years looking at that ring on Carol's finger, and something registered in my chest before my eyes had fully processed what they were seeing. The stone was wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Not obviously wrong to anyone who had not spent 3 decades knowing every facet of the real one. But wrong in the particular flat way of something manufactured to look like something else. The light did not move through it. The same way did not scatter into those tiny rainbow fragments that Carol's ring had thrown across the ceiling when the morning sun hit it just right. I looked up at Ruth. "Howard Bellamy," she said, naming the man who had run Bellamy Fine Jewelry on Fifth Avenue for going on 40 years. Howard was 70 now, semi-retired, and had known Ruth since they were in the same high school graduating class. Valerie came into his shop about 2 years ago, brought the ring in to have it cleaned and sized, she said. Howard recognized it. He had seen it on Carol's hand at 100 different town events over the years. Ruth wrapped both hands around her coffee mug, squeezing it tight. He cleaned it, sized it, and when he handed it back, he noticed she was looking at the estate cases in the display counter. She asked him what a ring like that would appraise for. My throat had gone very tight. He told her. Ruth continued, her voice steady, but her knuckles pale around the mug. And 3 weeks later, she came back and sold it to him. Cash transaction. He did not realize until afterward that it was Carol's, the one from the family. He felt terrible. He tracked me down at the church auxiliary last spring and told me in person. She paused. I have been trying to figure out the right time to tell you ever since. I looked down at the velvet box still open in my hands. The fake stone winked up at me in the morning light, cheerful and hollow. Carol had worn that ring for 31 years. She had been wearing it the day she died. I had taken it off her hand myself in room 214 at Vanderbilt Medical Center and given it to Valerie on the day she married Julian, because it was the most meaningful thing I had left to give. The pain that moved through me then was not the sharp kind. It was the slow, deep kind, the kind that has been sitting in the walls of a house for a long time, and only becomes visible when the light hits it at a certain angle. My eyes burned. I pressed the lid of the box closed carefully, the way you close something that deserves to be handled gently, even when everything inside you wants to grip something hard and hold on. Thank you for telling me, I said. My voice came out quieter than I intended. Ruth reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She did not say anything for a moment, which from Ruth meant everything. She was not a woman who touched people casually or went quiet without cause. What are you going to do? She asked. What I should have done a long time ago, I said. Ruth nodded once slowly, in the way that meant she was with me all the way down. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text message from Valerie. It was long. Longer than her usual messages, and the tone had shifted in a way I had never quite heard from her before, not the warm, practiced efficiency she used when she needed something, but something raw underneath it, like a person who has been pleasant for a very long time and is running out of patience for it. She had noticed she wrote that some of the automatic transfers from the joint account had stopped processing. She wanted to know what was happening. She needed the account fully accessible to finalize the catering payment for Thursday. If you are thinking about doing something that disrupts this family right before the holiday, I need you to understand what that means. Sharon and Leo have been looking forward to this for months. If you decide to make things difficult, I will have no choice but to limit how much time the kids spend coming over to your house. I do not want to do that. But I need you to think about what your actions cost other people, not just yourself. I read it twice. My jaw tightened until I could feel it in my temples. Then I set the phone face down on the counter and went back to my coffee. At 9:15 that evening, someone knocked on my front door. I already knew it was Julian before I opened it. Marcus had warned me 3 days earlier that if Julian felt the financial situation shifting under him, he would come in person rather than call, because Julian Vance was a man who believed that physical presence was a form of argument. I had spent that afternoon moving Carol's old photo album from the bedroom bookshelf to the small table beside the front door, directly under the lamp. The digital voice recorder I had bought at the electronics store on Highway 70 was tucked inside the back cover, switched on set to activate on sound. Tennessee law allowed a person to record any conversation they were a direct party to without informing the other party. Marcus had confirmed this twice. I opened the door. Julian filled the frame. He was in a sport coat, no tie, the kind of dressed down but still impressive look he deployed when he wanted to seem both authoritative and reasonable at the same time. His jaw was set, and his eyes were doing the thing they did when he was performing control he did not entirely feel. "We need to talk, Arthur," he said. "Come in," I said, stepping back. He stepped into the doorway, but did not come further, planted himself in the threshold, the way a man does when he wants the option to loom without committing to entering. His eyes moved around the front room once quickly, the way he assessed spaces for value. "The account is frozen," he said. It was not a question. "Some transfers have been paused," I said, "while I review things." His face went a shade darker. "Review things." He repeated it like the words tasted bad. "Arthur, Thanksgiving is in 2 days. The catering balance is due. The flowers are due. You have a commitment to this family, and you are sitting here reviewing things." "What commitment is that, Julian?" I asked. He blinked, just slightly. "You have always handled the finances. Everyone knows that. It is what you do." "It is what I did," I said. "There is a difference." Julian leaned forward slightly in the doorframe, not crossing the threshold, but making himself larger in it. His voice dropped to something he probably thought sounded controlled. "I am going to be direct with you. I have had you evaluated by 2 professionals over the past year. People who know what declining cognitive function looks like in a man your age. If you keep interfering with this family's finances, I will take that documentation to a probate court and petition for a conservatorship, which means someone else controls your assets. Which means this house, this account, everything goes under review by a judge." I looked at him for the long moment. The lamp was on beside me, warm and steady. The photo album sat on the table underneath it. I could not hear the recorder, but I knew it was running. "Is that everything?" I asked. Julian stared at me, clearly expecting something other than that. His prepared script had not included a man who simply asked if he was done. "Think very carefully," he said, but the certainty in his voice had developed a hairline crack. "I have thought carefully," I said. "Good night, Julian. Drive safe." I stepped back and closed the door. I stood in the front hallway for a moment, listening to his footsteps cross the porch, then the sound of his car starting in the driveway. When the headlights swept across the front window and disappeared, I reached under the photo album and turned the recorder off. I had everything I needed now. The only question was what to build with it. After Julian's headlights disappeared from the front window, I sat down at the kitchen table with the recorder in front of me and played it back. I listened to the whole thing from the beginning. My footsteps crossing the floor to the door. The sound of the latch. Julian's voice filling my front hallway with its practiced authority. I listened to his threat about the conservatorship, about the documentation he claimed to have about what he intended to do with it if I did not cooperate. I listened to my own voice quieter than I had realized in the moment, asking him if that was everything. When it finished, I pressed stop and set the recorder down flat on the table. Then I called Marcus. "I have the audio," I said when he picked up. Julian came in person. He threatened a conservatorship petition based on fabricated cognitive assessments. Marcus was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. He actually said that out loud. He did. "Good Lord." A pause. "Arthur, that threat on its own constitutes criminal extortion under Tennessee statute. He essentially told you he would use false medical documentation to seize control of your assets unless you complied with his financial demands." I could hear Marcus clicking a pen on the other end of the line. "Combined with the IRS findings, the bank records, and the vendor invoices, we now have enough to move on multiple fronts simultaneously." "What do I need to do tonight?" I asked. "Tonight you call the bank's after-hours fraud line and submit a formal request to restrict secondary account access, effective immediately," Marcus said. "As the primary account holder and the person who established the account, You have the right to do this unilaterally, particularly given documented evidence of unauthorized use. The bank will freeze Valerie's withdrawal privileges pending review. He gave me the number. I wrote it on a piece of paper the way I always wrote things down. And Marcus, I said before I hung up. Thursday. I am going to the dinner. A pause. Are you sure? I need to be in the room, I said. Not to pay, not to fix anything, just to be there when it comes apart. Marcus thought about that for a moment. Then be careful, he said. And don't bring your wallet. After I hung up, I made the call to the bank. The woman on the fraud line walked me through the process efficiently and without drama, the way people do when they have handled worse things than this before breakfast. It took 11 minutes. When it was done, Valerie's access to the joint account was suspended, pending a formal review that Marcus had already begun preparing documentation for. 20 years of automatic access closed in 11 minutes. I sat with that for a while. Then I called Danny. He answered on the second ring, which told me he had been awake, which told me he had been thinking about all of this the same way I had. Dad, he said, and the single word carried everything, the worry, the loyalty, the anger he had been managing carefully for weeks. I need to tell you something, I said, and then I need to ask you something. I told him what I had done with the account. I told him about the recorder and what was on it. I told him about Marcus and the documents and what Thursday was going to look like. I told it straight without softening any of the edges because Danny was 34 years old and had his mother's good sense and deserved the whole picture. He listened without interrupting the same way Marcus did, which was one of the things I had always loved about both of them. When I finished, he let out a long, slow breath. Okay, he said. The word was steady, but I could hear the weight behind it. What do you need from me? Valerie assigned you to run the AV equipment at the Harmon room Thursday night, I said. The screen, the projector, the inputs. She is planning to run a family video at some point during the evening. I need you to be at that panel before she gets there, and I need you to have a different set of files ready to go. Silence on the line. Not the uncomfortable kind, the kind where a person is thinking something through carefully before they speak. The bank records, Danny said. The trust filings. And the audio from tonight, I said. Marcus will send you the cleaned file tomorrow morning. There is also a video. I paused here because this was the part I had not yet explained. When I was at Valerie's house last week, standing behind the cedar fence when Julian was talking to Harper, I had my phone in my coat pocket. I had already started recording when I heard Julian's voice. I let that settle. I did not plan it, but it was running. Danny made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite something else. You recorded him without knowing what you were going to get. I recorded him, I confirmed. The way you keep a circuit tester in your pocket, even when you do not expect to find a live wire. I will be ready, Danny said. His voice had gone very quiet and very certain, the way it got when he had made up his mind about something and was done deliberating. What time do you want me there? 4 o'clock, I said, before the staff finishes setup. 4 o'clock, he repeated. Dad. He stopped. Go ahead, I said. I should have said something sooner, he said. A long time ago, I should have pushed harder. You were one voice in a room that was not listening, I said. That is not a failure. That is just a hard place to stand. He did not answer right away. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, and I knew he was holding something back, not because he did not trust me with it, but because some things need a little more time before they are ready to be said out loud. I will be there at 4, he said finally. I know you will, I said. After I hung up, I went to the bedroom closet. On the left side, behind the winter coats and a box of Carol's books I had never been able to give away, there was a single dark suit in a dry cleaning bag. navy blue single-breasted with a faint chalk stripe that was only visible in good light. Carol had picked it out for me at a department store in Nashville on a Saturday afternoon in the fall of 2003, 2 years before she died. I had worn it to her funeral and twice since then, and had kept it cleaned and pressed out of a habit I could not fully explain. I unzipped the bag and took the jacket off the hanger. I held it for a moment, the fabric familiar and cool against my palms. Then I hung it on the back of the bedroom door, where I would see it first thing in the morning, went to the kitchen counter, and deliberately left my wallet sitting next to the coffee maker. Thanksgiving morning I woke before the sun came up. I made coffee. I stood at the kitchen window and watched the sky go from black to gray to the particular pale gold of a Tennessee November morning, and I thought about Carol the way I did most mornings, quietly and without drama. Then I thought about what the day was going to bring. Danny had texted at 6:15. 4 words, "Files are ready, Dad." I put on the navy suit. I did not pick up the wallet. For the first time in 20 years, I was walking into that room with nothing to offer but myself. I drove toward the Harmon room as the town was waking up around me, and somewhere across town, according to what Danny told me later, Valerie was sitting at her vanity mirror, getting ready for the evening, and she had paused with her hand halfway to her earring, looking at the ring on her left hand. The fake one. Danny said she sat like that for almost a full minute. He said she picked up her phone and pulled up my number and held it there, her thumb hovering. He said her eyes were bright, in a way that might have been the lighting and might not have been. Then Julian called from downstairs, asking where his cufflinks were, and just like that, the moment was gone. She put the phone down, she put in the earring, and she finished getting ready for the party she believed I was going to pay for. I have to borrow my son's eyes for this part of the story. I was not inside the Harmon room for what happened in the hour before everything came apart. I was sitting in my truck in the parking lot, across the street, watching the snow that had started falling around 4:30 light, and unhurried, the kind of snow that does not know yet how serious it intends to be. I had asked Danny to be my witness in that room, and Danny is the most honest person I have ever known. So what follows is the evening. The way he saw it told to me later at my kitchen table, which is where our family has always done its most important talking. Danny got there at 4 o'clock. He told me the place looked exactly like it always did, like money and effort had gotten together and agreed on something. The Harmon room's event staff was finishing the last of the table setup when he came through the side entrance, the one near the AV closet that Valerie had directed him to 2 weeks earlier, when she handed him a typed list of his responsibilities for the evening. Run the projector. Cue the family video at 8 o'clock. Make sure the sound levels were right. He had smiled and told her he would handle it. He handled it. He spent 40 minutes at the AV panel, working quietly, while the staff moved around him, arranging centerpieces and testing the microphones. He loaded the files my attorney Marcus Webb had sent him that morning, the trust fund records, the vendor invoices, the audio from Julian's visit to my house, and he organized them in the order we had discussed. He tested the output twice, confirmed the sound was clean, and then closed the panel and went to find himself a glass of water and a place to stand where he could see the whole room. He found the spot near the far wall beside a tall potted fern that had been there as long as anyone could remember, and he stood there and watched the evening begin to fill itself in. Gordon Mitchell arrived at 4:45. Danny described him to me as a man in his early 50s, silver at the temples, in a dark suit that fit the way suits fit when a person wears them every day and does not think about it. He was carrying a burgundy folder thick with papers, and he moved through the room with the measured pace of someone who has delivered difficult news before and has learned not to rush it. He positioned himself near the bar at the far end of the main floor, set the folder on the counter beside him, and waited. He was still waiting when the guests started arriving at 5:30. Danny watched Valerie work the door. He told me she was flawless. That was the word he used, and he did not mean it as a compliment, though it was accurate. She had on a deep green dress, and her hair was done the way she did it for events, and she greeted every person who came through that door with the precise warmth of a woman who had rehearsed sincerity until it came naturally. She took coats. She laughed at things. She touched people's arms when she agreed with them. She was, Danny said, the best version of herself that she knew how to be. Julian was at the main table holding court, with two of his real estate contacts, his voice carrying across the room at the particular volume that meant he wanted it to. He had a drink in his hand, and the loose, confident posture of a man who believes the evening is going exactly according to his design. The Harmon room filled steadily. Cousins Arthur had not seen since summer. A few of Carol's old friends who came every year out of a loyalty that had long since transferred to the tradition itself rather than the man who funded it. Neighbors. Julian's associates. Danny watched Julian spot them from across the room. Watched the way Julian's posture changed, straightened slightly, recalibrated the way a salesman adjusts when an important client walks in. Julian excused himself from the conversation he was in and moved toward the Harpers with his hand already extended. Harper shook it briefly, said something polite, and then his eyes moved past Julian and scanned the room with the same unhurried inventory Danny had seen him do before, apparently looking for someone, not finding him. Danny felt his chest tighten at that. He looked over at the small round table near the kitchen access door, the one that had always been Arthur's. It was set for two. Place cards, a small centerpiece, everything in order. Empty. Sharon found Danny at around 5:45. She was 16 and dressed up in the way teenagers dress up when they have been told to, a little uncomfortable, a little uncertain. Her eyes moving around the room with the particular alertness of a young person who has learned to read adult tension before adults know they are broadcasting it. "Where is Grandpa Arthur?" she asked. "He will be here," Danny told her. Sharon looked at him for a moment, with those steady eyes of hers. "Something is happening tonight, isn't it?" Danny told me he did not lie to her. He said he told her that yes, something was happening, and that whatever it was, she should stay close to Leo and not be scared. She had nodded at him with a gravity that he said made her look exactly like Carol. Then she went back to her little brother, took his hand, and stayed where Danny could see her. At 5:50, Danny noticed Valerie's smile developing a small, almost imperceptible fault line, just at the edges. The kind of crack that only shows up when the person wearing the expression has been holding it for too long, and the muscles underneath are starting to remember they have other things to do. Gordon Mitchell had moved from his position at the bar. He was circling now slowly, the burgundy folder under one arm, waiting for a moment with Valerie that she kept not providing. Every time he angled toward her, she turned slightly, redirected her attention, absorbed herself in another conversation. She knew he was there. She was managing the distance between them the way you manage a conversation you are not ready to have. Julian was at the Harper table now, talking about a development project on the north side of the county, in the animated way he talked about money when he wanted someone to invest in it. Harper was listening with the polite, non-committal expression of a man who has heard many pitches and funded very few of them. Danny checked his watch. 5:58. He moved back to his position near the AV panel, casually, the way a person moves when they have somewhere to be and do not want to announce it. Gordon Mitchell finally caught Valerie near the bar at 5:59. Danny was close enough to see the moment she registered what was in his hand. Her chin came up slightly. Her shoulders pulled back. She said something to Gordon in a low voice, and Gordon said something back. And whatever it was, it put a very specific expression on Valerie's face, the expression of a woman who has been running a bluff for 20 years and has just noticed for the first time that someone across the table might be looking at her cards. At exactly 6 o'clock, Julian reached into his jacket pocket and produced the black card. The server was a young woman, maybe 23, with her hair pinned back, and the careful, professional expression of someone who had been trained to handle difficult moments without showing that they were difficult. She took the black card from Julian with both hands, the way the staff at the Harmon Room always did, and she carried it to the terminal at the service station near the edge of the main floor. Danny said the room did not go quiet all at once. It went quiet the way a room goes quiet when something is happening that people have not yet decided whether to acknowledge, a gradual, almost involuntary drawing in of breath conversations, trailing off at the edges, attention shifting, without anyone quite meaning to shift it. The terminal made the sound it always made, a soft electronic chirp as the card connected, then a different sound, a flat, single-note tone, short, definitive. The server looked at the screen. She looked at the card. She ran it again, because that is what you do, you run it again, and hope the first result was an anomaly. The machine produced the same tone with the same indifference it would have brought to any other piece of information it had been asked to deliver. She walked back to Julian. Danny was close enough to hear what she said, and he told me she handled it with more grace than the situation deserved. She leaned in slightly and said in a voice low enough that only the people immediately nearby could hear, "I am so sorry, sir. The card has been declined. Would you like to try another method of payment?" Julian's face went the particular shade of red that has nothing to do with embarrassment, and everything to do with a man whose carefully constructed image has just developed a visible crack in public. He took the card back, looked at it as though it had personally betrayed him, and produced a second card from his wallet, one of his business accounts, a corporate card for JV Capital Properties, with a silver finish that Danny recognized from the times Julian had used it at family dinners over the years. The server ran it. The machine produced the same flat tone. Julian's jaw tightened. He pulled a third card, then a fourth. Each one went into the terminal with a little less certainty than the one before it, and each one came back with the same answer, and by the fourth card, the room had stopped pretending not to notice. The conversations that had been winding down were fully stopped now. 50 people, family neighbors, Harper's associates. The cousins who had texted Arthur the word selfish were looking at the service station with the careful sideways attention of people who want to see what is happening without appearing to watch. Danny told me Julian said something under his breath at that point. Something short and sharp that the server absorbed without reacting to, because she was 23 years old and working a holiday shift and had decided correctly that this was above her pay grade to solve. Across the room, Harper had gone very still. Mildred touched his arm once lightly, and he covered her hand with his, but did not look away from what was unfolding near the service station. And then Gordon Mitchell moved. He had been waiting the entire evening for this moment, patient and unhurried, the burgundy folder under his arm. He crossed the main floor with the measured walk of a man who is doing his job and is not going to apologize for it, and he stopped in front of Valerie, who had been making her way toward Julian with the rigid brightness of a woman trying to manage a situation that is escaping her grip. "Mrs. Vance," Gordon said. His voice was even and professional and carried no pleasure whatsoever, which Danny said made it somehow worse. "I am sorry to interrupt your evening. Given that the automatic payment arrangement through the primary account holder has been suspended, we will need to settle the remaining balance for tonight's event before service continues." He opened the folder and extended it toward her. Valerie took it. Her fingers were steady, and Danny gave her that much. Her fingers were steady, and her face was composed, and she looked down at the first page with the practiced control of a woman who had been managing impressions in public for her entire adult life. And then her eyes reached the numbers. Danny said he watched the color leave her face the way color leaves a room when a cloud moves across the sun, not all at once, but steadily, unmistakably, until something that had been warm and lit was neither of those things anymore. Her eyes moved down the page, the catering balance, the bar tab, the floral arrangement invoice, and below those on a second page Gordon turned to for her with one careful hand the itemized accounting from the internal audit. 3 years of overbilled amounts, the cash differential, the name of the bookkeeper who had documented it before she was let go. The total figure at the bottom, $60,000, when you added the two amounts together, sitting there in clean black type on a page that had been prepared by people who did not enjoy preparing it, but were going to do it correctly regardless. Valerie's throat moved, once hard. "I need a moment," she said to Gordon. "Of course," he said, and stepped back exactly one pace, which was professional and also changed nothing. Julian appeared at her elbow, having abandoned the service station. His voice was low and pressurized the way steam sounds when it has found a small opening. "What is it? What does it say?" "Not here," Valerie said through her teeth. "Valerie, what does it—" "Julian." Her voice cracked on his name like a branch under too much weight. "Not here," Danny said. The room felt very different in that moment. The warmth that Valerie had spent 2 hours constructing the candlelight, and the music, and the laughter at exactly the right moments had not disappeared exactly. It was still all there physically, but something underneath it had shifted the way a foundation shifts before anything above it shows the damage, and everyone in the room could feel it, even if they could not yet say what they were feeling. Sharon had found her way back to Danny's side. He felt her hand close around his arm tight. "Danny," she whispered. "Almost," he said. And then the front door of the Harmon room opened, and a cold draft moved through the room, and every head turned toward it, and my father walked in. My phone had buzzed in my coat pocket at 5:57 while I was sitting in my truck watching the snow come down on the parking lot across from the Harmon room. It was Ruth. "Arthur." Her voice was low and steady, the way it got when she had assessed a situation and arrived at a conclusion. "You need to come in now, not in 10 minutes, now." I had been waiting for that call. I had been sitting in the cab of my truck for going on 2 hours, watching the windows of the Harmon room glow warm and gold in the early dark. And I had known the way you know a circuit is live before you touch it, a kind of whole-body awareness that does not require confirmation that the moment was close. I got out of the truck. The cold hit me the second I opened the door, clean and sharp, the kind of November cold that makes everything feel more consequential than it probably is. The snow had been falling since mid-afternoon, light enough that it was still more suggestion than accumulation, and it had settled in a thin layer across the shoulders of my navy suit by the time I reached the front door of the restaurant. I stopped with my hand on the door handle. My wallet was on the kitchen counter at home. My checkbook was in the desk drawer in my study. I had nothing in my pockets except my truck keys, my phone, and the particular quiet of a man who has spent 61 years learning when to act and has finally, for once in his life, chosen the right moment. I opened the door and walked in. The cold draft came in with me, and every head in the room turned. I had walked into the Harmon room's event space nearly 20 times over the past 2 decades. I had walked in carrying deposit receipts and signed contracts and the particular invisible weight of a man who has already paid for everything and is hoping the evening goes well enough to justify it. I had walked in and found my way to the small round table near the kitchen door, and sat down and stayed quiet, and told myself that being useful was the same thing as belonging. This time I walked in and the room went still. Not the polite conversational stillness of people momentarily distracted. A real stillness. The kind that happens when 50 people in the same room simultaneously sense that something is occurring that they will be talking about for a long time. The music kept playing. A piano arrangement of something seasonal coming from the speakers in the corners. Nobody was listening to it anymore. I saw the room the way you see a room when you have stopped being afraid of it. Ruth was near the back wall, standing with 2 of Carol's old friends, and when she saw me come through the door, she did not smile or wave. She just straightened slightly, the way she had been straightening for 65 years when a situation called for it, and gave me a single nod that contained everything she needed to say. I saw Danny at the far side of the room, positioned near the AV panel, with the casual stillness of someone pretending not to be ready. I saw Harper at the main table, very still, his eyes moving between Julian and me with the measured attention of a man doing arithmetic. I saw Gordon Mitchell standing one step back from Valerie, the burgundy folder still in his hands, watching the room the way a man watches a situation he has been professionally trained not to make worse. And I saw Valerie. She was standing near the bar, the open folder in her hands. And when she saw me come through that door, something happened in her face that I had not expected and that I have thought about many times since. Relief. Genuine, unguarded relief, the kind that comes before the brain has caught up to the moment, the kind that reveals what a person actually believes underneath everything they have constructed on top. She believed I had come to fix it. After 20 years, after everything, she still believed that when things fell apart, her father would walk through the door and make them right. Part of me understood that completely. Part of me ached with it. She came toward me quickly, her heels clicking against the hardwood, and she reached for my arm the way she had reached for it 1,000 times, the practiced grip of a woman who has learned that physical contact can redirect a conversation before it starts. "Dad!" Her voice was pitched for me, but loud enough for the people nearest us to catch the edges of it. "Thank God you are here. There has been a misunderstanding with the payment processing, and Gordon needs someone to authorize." "Valerie," I said. Something in my voice stopped her. Not the volume, I was not loud, but there was something in it that she had not heard from me before, or had not heard in so long she had forgotten it was there, and it made her hand loosen on my arm without her deciding to loosen it. I looked at her for a moment. My daughter, 38 years old, in her green dress with the fake ring on her left hand and the folder full of consequences in her right, and an entire room of people watching her from every angle. Then I looked at the room. "There is no misunderstanding," I said. I did not raise my voice. I rarely needed to in a room that was already this quiet. "The account is closed. The payments have stopped. That is not a processing error." A sound moved through the crowd. Not words, just the collective intake of breath that happens when something lands. Valerie's expression shifted. The relief had burned off entirely now, and what was underneath it was something raw and more familiar. The particular anger of a person whose plan has failed and who needs immediately somewhere to put that failure. "Dad," her voice climbed. "Do you have any idea what you are doing right now in front of everyone? You are embarrassing this family. You are doing it again, just like you always." "I never ruined anything," I said. The words came out evenly without heat, and I meant them in a way I had not meant them the 100 other times I might have said them over the past 20 years, if I had ever found the courage. I just stopped paying for a party I was never really invited to. The room went so quiet that the piano arrangement in the corner felt suddenly absurdly loud. I watched those words move through the crowd, the way a change in air pressure moves through a building. You cannot see it, but you can see what it does to the things around it. Faces shifted. Eyes moved. People who had been looking at Valerie looked at me. People who had been looking at the floor looked up. Julian, standing 6 feet away, with his 4 declined cards in his jacket pocket, opened his mouth. He closed it again. Valerie pressed forward, her voice tight and fast, reaching for the script that had always worked before. "You always do this. Every single time. You make everything about yourself and you ruin. I was the one paying for this room," I said, still quiet, still even. "For 19 years before tonight. I believe that earns me 2 sentences." The words did not echo. They did not need to. Harper at the main table set down his glass, and across the room I heard my son's voice. "Dad." Danny was standing at the AV panel now, his hand on the input switch, and he was looking directly at me with an expression I recognized, the same expression he had worn at 14 years old in a hospital hallway when he had walked into my chest and held on, and I had made him a promise I did not say out loud. "I think," Danny said to the room, "as much as to me, people should see something." He pressed the switch. The screen behind the main table lit up. Before I reveal the ultimate showdown and the bitter truth at the altar, comment, "Keep watching," or drop the number 99, so I know you're still here with me. Please note, the upcoming events contain fictionalized elements for dramatic effect and may not fully align with reality. If you prefer not to engage with these harsh lessons, you can turn off the video right here. The first thing that appeared on the screen was a spreadsheet. Not a family photo. Not a slideshow of Thanksgivings past. A spreadsheet, clean columns, black type on white, the kind of document that tells the truth about things whether you want it to or not. It filled the projection screen behind the main table, completely large enough that every person in the room could read it without moving from where they stood. At the top, in simple, bold text, Carol Chandler, Scholarship Trust, Transaction History. I watched the room read it. There is a particular quality to the silence that falls over people when they are looking at financial records they were not supposed to see. It is not the silence of shock. Shock is louder than people expect, full of small sounds. This was the silence of comprehension. Of a room full of adults doing arithmetic, following columns of numbers down a page, arriving at conclusions they could not unknow. The deposits were there. Contributions from family members, from Carol's old colleagues, from business associates, who had believed they were funding scholarships for deserving students. Names I recognized. Amounts I recognized from the announcement Valerie had made the previous Thanksgiving, with one hand over her heart and the other on a clipboard. And then the outgoing transfers. Clean, regular, dated. Each one marked with the same destination, AV Capital Properties, LLC. Each one listed under the same description, consulting services rendered. A woman near the back of the room said something quietly to the person beside her. I could not hear the words. I did not need to. Julian heard it. I watched him realize what was on the screen. It happened in stages, the way bad news always happens, first. The eyes tracking across the projection, then the jaw, then the particular stillness that comes over a person's face when their body understands something, before their mind has decided what to do about it. The color drained from his face the way it had drained from Valerie's moments before, but on Julian, it looked different. On Valerie, it had looked like fear. On Julian, it looked like a man watching the room he thought he owned rearrange itself around someone else. Then the screen changed. The spreadsheet dissolved and was replaced by a waveform, the visual representation of an audio recording, two jagged lines running parallel across a dark background. Danny's voice came through the speakers, calm and technical, the way he sounded when he was explaining a repair to a customer. This recording was made on the evening of Wednesday, November 26th, at 9:15 p.m. at the residence of Arthur Chandler. The other party was not informed of the recording. Under Tennessee law, this recording is legal. Then Julian's voice filled the room. Every conversation I had ever had with Julian Vance had taken place in the presence of other people at tables or in doorways or at events where performance was the point. I had never heard his voice stripped of its audience until that night in my front hallway. And what I heard on that recording was a different register, entirely flat, pressurized, the voice of a man who had dropped the closing the deal warmth because he did not think he needed it anymore. The threat came through the speakers clearly. The conservatorship, the fabricated documentation, the ultimatum delivered to a 61-year-old man in his own front hallway by someone who had a key to that house until 3 years ago. A sound moved through the room. Not words. A collective exhale, the kind that happens when 50 people simultaneously feel something they do not have a name for yet, but know is wrong. Julian took a step toward the AV panel. Danny stepped in front of it, He did not say anything. He was 34 years old and a head shorter than Julian, and had motor oil permanently embedded in his knuckles, and he stood in front of that panel with the calm, rooted stillness of a man who has decided exactly where he is standing and is not going to be moved from it. Julian stopped. The recording finished. The screen changed a third time. The video was shaky, in the way phone video is shaky when a person is standing very still and trying not to be noticed. The slight involuntary tremor of held breath, of a man doing his best not to move while his hands recorded something he had not planned to record, but had the presence of mind to let run. The cedar fence was visible along the bottom of the frame. The backyard fire pit glowed orange in the fading afternoon light. And Julian was there in his sport coat, holding his drink, saying words that had been meant for an audience of one. The words came through the phone's microphone with the particular tinny quality of outdoor audio, but they were clear enough. I watched the people in that room listen to Julian describe me as an old electrician who shows up to take up space. I watched them hear Valerie's laugh, easy, warm, belonging to someone who had heard this opinion before and had no objection to it. I did not look at Valerie during this part. I did not trust myself to. The video ended. The screen went dark. The room held its breath for 1 full second. Then 2. Julian moved. Not toward the screen this time, toward Thomas Harper. He crossed the room quickly, closing the distance between them, with the momentum of a man who has 1 card left and intends to play it loudly. He put himself in front of Harper's chair, with his hands slightly spread open, placating the body language of a man attempting to rebrand a situation in real time. Thomas. His voice had found a version of its warmth again, thinner than usual, but present. I want to explain. What you just saw, the recordings, the documents, this is a family situation that has been taken out of context. Arthur and I have had our differences, that is true, but what Danny just put on that screen is a... Julian. Harper's voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It had the quality that comes from 60-some years of being taken seriously without having to demand it. Julian stopped. Harper stood up slowly. He was a big man, and the act of standing was itself a kind of statement. He straightened the lapels of his jacket, with both hands, taking his time, and when he was done, he looked at Julian with an expression that was not angry, and was not disgusted, and was somehow worse than either of those things. It was the expression of a man who has simply stopped finding another man worth his attention. I came to this dinner tonight because I have known Arthur Chandler for going on 15 years, Harper said, addressing not just Julian, but the room behind him. And because in 15 years I have never known him to be anything other than a man of his word. I was considering a significant investment in a project associated with your firm. He paused. He let that sit. I am no longer considering it. He turned to where I was standing. He crossed the room toward me, and when he reached me, he extended his hand. Not the brief transactional handshake of a man being polite, the two-handed grip of a man who means what he is doing. He held it for a moment, looking me directly in the eye, with an expression that I had to work very hard to receive without looking away from. Arthur, he said. Just my name. Nothing attached to it. Sometimes that is enough. Mildred Harper appeared at his side, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She looked at me with the quiet, level eyes of a woman who had spent decades watching her husband take the measure of people and had developed her own reliable method of doing the same. She did not say anything. She simply looked at me in a way that communicated something clearly enough that words would have been redundant. Then the Harpers turned and walked toward the exit, unhurried, without looking back. Julian watched them go. I watched Julian watch them go. The room he had performed in for 20 years was no longer organizing itself around him. The faces that had laughed at his jokes and admired his card and stood at his tables had rearranged themselves into something else entirely, not hostile, not theatrical, just honest. The plain, uncomfortable honesty of people who have just learned something they cannot unlearn and are not yet sure what to do with it. Julian turned back toward the room, and across it, near the far wall, still standing in front of the AV panel he was not going to move away from, my son looked at him. And then from somewhere near the kitchen door, I heard my daughter's voice crack open, like something that had been sealed for a very long time. The voice I had heard cracking open was Valerie's, and what came out of it was not grief, not yet. What came out first was anger, the particular combustible anger of a person who has been publicly exposed and has not yet found anywhere to put it except outward. She turned to face me fully. Her green dress, her careful hair, the hostess composure she had maintained for the better part of 3 hours, all of it was still technically in place, but something underneath had given way, and you could see it in the way she was holding her body. Too straight, too rigid. The posture of someone gripping something very hard to keep from losing it entirely. "You had no right," she said. Her voice was shaking and sharp, at the same time the way things get when they are under more pressure than they were built for. "You had absolutely no right to do this here, in front of these people, in front of the Harpers, in front of our family. You think this is what justice, you think humiliating your own daughter in a room full of people is something a father does." I did not answer right away, not because I did not have an answer, because I was looking at my daughter, really looking at her, and I was seeing something underneath the anger that the anger was working very hard to cover. She was frightened. Not of me, she had never been frightened of me. Frightened of what the room now knew. Frightened of the version of herself that had just appeared on a projection screen in front of everyone she had spent 20 years performing for. "I did not put anything on that screen that was not true," I said quietly. "That is not the point." Her voice broke on the last word, and she pressed her lips together hard, fighting to pull it back. "The point is that you chose to do this here tonight in the worst possible way. You want to talk about family. This is what you do to family." She took a step toward me, her eyes bright with tears. She was absolutely refusing to let fall because Valerie had never cried in public in her life and was not going to start now in front of 50 people. "You ruined everything," she said. "You always, Mom." The word was not loud. It did not need to be. It came from a 16-year-old girl standing up from her chair at the far end of the room, and it cut through the space between Valerie and me like a clean line drawn through a complicated diagram. Sharon was on her feet. I had watched my granddaughter grow up at a distance that was not of my choosing, at the kids' table at the far end of family photographs, through the window of a relationship managed by a woman who controlled access the way she controlled everything else. Sharon was 16 years old and had her grandmother Carol's eyes, and I was learning in this moment Carol's particular brand of courage, which was not the loud kind, but was completely immovable once it had made up its mind. She walked toward us from across the room. Her steps were not hurried, and they were not hesitant. Leo, 12 years old, and not fully understanding what was happening, but understanding enough, scrambled up from his chair and followed his sister the way he had followed her his entire life, his small hand finding hers as they moved. "Mom," Sharon said again, stopping a few feet away. Her voice was shaking, but she was not stopping. "Please stop." Valerie stared at her daughter. "Sharon, this is not... I know about the tuition." Sharon's voice cracked slightly, and she pushed through it, her chin coming up. "I saw the email last year on Grandpa Arthur's computer when I was visiting. The email from Ridgewood Academy, about the payment he had made for my sophomore year." She looked at me then, and her eyes were wet, and she pressed her lips together for just a second before she kept going. "I have been carrying that for a year, and I have not said anything because I did not know how. But I cannot stand here and watch you call him the problem when he is the reason I had a school to go to." The room was completely still. Valerie opened her mouth. No sound came out. "He paid for my school," Sharon said, and her voice was steadier now, gaining something as she went. He paid for everything. I do not know all of it, but I know some of it, and I know it was a lot, and I know that nobody ever thanked him for any of it." Her voice broke on the last sentence, and this time she let it, and 2 tears ran down her face without her doing anything to stop them. "I am done pretending I do not know." She turned to me. She looked up at me with those eyes that I had been seeing across rooms for 16 years, always at a distance, always managed away before we could get too close, and she said, "I am sorry, Grandpa Arthur. I should have said something sooner." My throat closed so tight I could not have spoken if I had tried. Leo, standing at his sister's side with his hand in hers, looked up at me with the uncomplicated directness of a 12-year-old who had decided which side of the room he was on and saw no reason to complicate it further. He took 1 step toward me and leaned into my arm the way small children do when they have decided you are safe, and I put my hand on the top of his head and kept it there. The room remained still, not the charged, combustible stillness of before. Something different now. The stillness of a room in which something has been said that cannot be taken back, and that most of the people present are privately relieved to have witnessed, even if they are not yet sure what to do about it. I looked at the faces around me. The cousins who had texted me the word selfish were looking at the table. One of them had set down her drink and had not picked it up again. A woman who had been Carol's closest friend for 30 years had her hand pressed flat against her sternum, the way people do when an emotion catches them in the chest. Julian was standing to the side of the room. He was not performing anymore. There was no audience left to perform for the neighbors. He had cultivated the contacts, he had impressed the investors, he had wanted to believe in. His version of this family had all been replaced by the plain, unhurried truth, and Julian Vance did not know what to do in a room that was running on truth instead of impression. He looked diminished. That was the word. Not destroyed, not broken, just diminished the way things look when the light around them changes, and what you took for solid turns out to have been mostly reflection. Ruth Chandler stood up. She had been standing near the back wall through all of it still, and watchful, and now she moved to the center of the room, with the unhurried authority of a woman who had earned every gray hair on her head and intended to use them. "I have watched this family for 20 years, she said. Her voice carried without effort, the way voices carry when they have something true behind them. I held my tongue because it was not my table to run. That was my mistake, and I own it." She looked at Valerie, not with anger, with something more difficult than anger, the steady, clear-eyed look of someone who loves you enough to tell you exactly what they see. "Your father did not ruin this family," Ruth said. "He held it together with both hands for 2 decades, while it took everything he had and gave him a seat by the kitchen door." Valerie's face crumpled. Fully, completely, all at once, the way faces crumple when the last thing holding them in place gives out. A sound came out of her that was not a word, something raw and shapeless from somewhere below the level of language. Nobody moved toward her, not because the room was cruel, because there are moments when a person needs to feel the full weight of something before anyone can help them carry it. And every adult in that room understood on some level that this was one of those moments. Ruth turned to me. "Arthur," she said, "let's go." I looked at the room one last time. I looked at the small round table near the kitchen access door, the one set for 2 with its little centerpiece still perfect, both chairs empty. I had sat at that table for 19 years and had never once let myself say out loud what I was feeling every single time I pulled out that chair. I felt it now, standing in the middle of the room. Felt it and let it go. I followed my sister to the door. The cold outside was the same cold it had been when I walked in. The snow was still falling unhurried, indifferent to everything that had just happened inside. Ruth took my arm when we reached the sidewalk, and we stood there for a moment, not speaking, watching the snow come down on the parking lot where my truck was waiting. My chest felt strange. Not painful, the opposite of painful. like something that had been compressed for a very long time had finally been allowed to expand back to its natural size. "You did right," Ruth said. I breathed in the cold air, breathed it out. For the first time in 20 years, I believed her. The morning after Thanksgiving, I woke up at 5:47. I know the exact time because I looked at the clock on the nightstand, the way I always do when I wake up before I mean to, and I lay there for a moment in the dark, listening to the house. It was quiet, not the ordinary quiet of early morning. I knew that quiet well had lived inside it for 20 years. This was different. Emptier somehow and fuller at the same time, the way a room feels after you have moved a piece of furniture that has been blocking a window for so long you had forgotten the window was there. For 20 years, the morning after Thanksgiving had always brought the same thing: a phone call from Valerie before 9 o'clock, bright and efficient, running through the recap of the previous evening and pivoting smoothly and without pause into the preliminary planning for the following year. What had worked? What had not? Whether we should try a different catering menu, whether the deposit for the Harmon room should go down in January or February to lock in the date. I lay in bed and waited for the phone to ring. It did not ring. I got up. I made coffee. I stood at the kitchen window and watched the November sky go pale over the backyard garden where the frost had finally finished off the last of the pumpkin vines. Everything out there was brown and done for the season, honest and uncomplicated, the way things look when they have completed what they came to do. I drank my coffee and felt the quiet settle around me like something I had not known I was waiting for. Marcus called at 8:15. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Better than I expected," I said. "Good." He got straight to it because Marcus had always understood that I preferred information to comfort. I submitted the full documentation package to the IRS Exempt Organizations Division Wednesday morning before Thanksgiving. Given the nature of the evidence, they moved quickly. As of this morning, the Carol Chandler Scholarship Trust has been formally suspended pending investigation. All associated accounts are frozen. I sat down at the kitchen table. "The trust fund that carried Carol's name," I said. Not a question. Just the fact of it, which still had a particular weight when I said it out loud. "Yes," Marcus said. "I want you to understand what that means practically. The IRS investigation is civil at this stage, not criminal, though it could become criminal depending on what they find. Julian's company, JV Capital Properties, is the named recipient of the fraudulent transfers. The IRS freeze on the trust accounts, combined with the banking restrictions already in place, means that company no longer has access to operating capital." "And the company," I said, "filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy protection this morning," Marcus said. "Liquidation, not reorganization liquidation, which means the assets get sold to pay the creditors and whatever is left over, if anything, goes to the principals." A pause. "There will not be much left over, Arthur. The debts are significant." I thought about Julian's face the night before, the way the room had stopped organizing itself around him. "The house," I asked. "The mortgage on the Vance property was partially secured through a business line of credit tied to JV Capital. When that line was frozen as part of the bankruptcy proceedings, the mortgage servicer issued a notice of default." Marcus spoke carefully, the way he always did when delivering news he wished were different. "They will have 60 days before formal foreclosure proceedings begin. But realistically, without the business income and with the IRS investigation ongoing, there is no path to curing the default." I was quiet for a moment. Not because I did not know what to say, but because I was taking the time to feel what I actually felt about it, which was not what I might have expected. I did not feel satisfied. I want to be honest about that. I have thought about it many times since, and the word that comes closest is sorrowful. A particular complicated sorrow, the kind that has nothing to do with regret, and everything to do with the plain, unglamorous reality of watching consequences arrive. Thank you, Marcus, I said. Arthur. He paused. You did the right thing, in the way that it needed to be done. I know, I said. That does not make the rest of it easy. He understood. That was one of the things I valued most about Marcus Webb. He never told me something was easier than it was. Danny came by that afternoon. He sat at my kitchen table in his work shirt, the one with the Chandler auto patch on the chest, and he told me what he knew about Valerie and Julian, which was not much yet because it was still very early and things were still moving. They were not living together. That was the main thing. Julian had gone to stay with a colleague from his old real estate office, and Valerie was at the house with Sharon and Leo managing the notice of default paperwork and trying to explain to two children why their father was not there and why their home was going to change. How is she? I asked. Danny looked at his hands for a moment. Scared, he said. Not performing scared, actually scared. I think this might be the first time in her adult life she does not have a system. He picked at a callus on his palm. She called me Tuesday, not to ask for anything, just to talk. He looked up at me. She asked how you were doing, Dad. I let that sit. What did you tell her? I asked. I told her you were okay, Danny said, and that she should probably tell you herself when she was ready. He did not stay long after that. There was not much more to say, and we were both men who understood that silence between people who trust each other is not emptiness, it is just space for things to settle. The letters started arriving toward the end of that first week. Not emails, letters. Actual handwritten letters and cards appearing one or two at a time in the mailbox at the end of my driveway. From cousins. From a neighbor 2 streets over who had attended the dinner. From one of Carol's old colleagues who had contributed to the scholarship fund and wanted me to know she understood now where that money had actually gone. Most of them said some version of the same thing. That they were sorry. That they had not known. That they wished they had looked more carefully, asked more questions, not simply accepted the story they had been given. I read each one. I wrote back to the ones that needed a response. I did not keep score. I was not in the business of collecting apologies the way I had once been in the business of absorbing blame, and the instinct to tally and measure other people's remorse was one I was actively choosing not to develop. And then on a Thursday evening near the end of that first week of December, I found a card in the mailbox that was different from the others. It was a simple cream-colored card, the kind that comes in a box from a stationery store, and the handwriting inside was Thomas Harper's deliberate and clear, the handwriting of a man who had been taught penmanship before it stopped being taught. He wrote that he was sorry for anything he may have done over the years to make my situation at those dinners more difficult than it already was. He wrote that he had always respected me and that the evening had confirmed for him what he had long suspected, that the man doing the most work in any room is rarely the man getting the credit for it. He wrote that the electrical work I had done on his mill 20 years ago was still running clean and efficient, and that there was a kind of integrity in that which he had never forgotten. At the very bottom, in smaller letters, he wrote, "Carol would have been proud of you. She always was." I did not know that Harper had known Carol well enough to say that. I sat at my kitchen table with the card in my hands for a long time, and I let my eyes go blurry and did not try to stop them. And I thought about a woman who had loved Thanksgiving, the way some people love a religion, and how 20 years of keeping her holiday alive had brought me to this kitchen on this December evening, with this card in my hands, feeling something I could not have named precisely, but which was very close to peace. I was still sitting there when I heard footsteps on the front porch. Slow ones, tired ones, with a particular hesitation in them that I recognized the way you recognize a sound you have not heard in a long time but have never entirely forgotten. I set the card down on the table and went to the door. She was not on the top step. She was on the second one down below the porch railing, slightly hidden from the street, the way a person positions themselves when they are not entirely sure they have the right to be somewhere, but cannot bring themselves to leave either. Her coat was pulled tight. Her hands were folded in her lap. She was looking out at the front yard, at the dead garden and the bare oak tree and the last of the snow, sitting stubborn along the north side of the fence, where the sun never quite reached. She did not look up when I opened the door. "I did not know if you would answer," she said. Her voice was flat and quiet, like something wrung out too many times to have much texture left. "I heard the steps," I said. I pushed the door open and stepped back. She got up slowly, the way people do when they have been sitting in the cold long enough for their body to stiffen around them, and she came inside without saying anything. I noticed as she passed me in the doorway that she looked different from how she had looked at Thanksgiving. Not just tired, everyone is tired after a week like the one she had been through. This was something else. The particular look of a person who has been carrying a great deal of weight in a very specific posture for a very long time and has finally, out of sheer exhaustion, set it down. Her shoulders were lower. The managed brightness she brought into every room she entered was simply gone, not collapsed, just absent, the way a light is absent when someone forgets to turn it on. She did not have a clipboard. I made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table, not at the head of it, not at the organized end. She always gravitated toward when she arrived with lists and agendas. She sat at the side closest to the window, where the pale December light came in thin through the bare branches of the oak tree. I did not rush her. In 61 years, I had learned that the things a person most needs to say rarely come out first. "I went to see Marcus Webb," she said finally, "last week." I had not known that. "He was professional," she said, which coming from Valerie was high praise. "He walked me through everything. The IRS process, the investigation timeline, what my legal exposure looks like." She turned her coffee mug slowly in both hands, watching it turn. "He thinks I can avoid incarceration if I cooperate fully and commit to repayment. Supervised probation for 2 years, community service, full restitution to everyone affected." She paused. "He said you had told him to be straight with me if I ever came asking." I had told him that, yes. She looked up at me then for the first time since she had come inside. Her eyes were clear, not because she was not grieving, but because she had apparently already done most of the crying and had moved through to the other side of it. "Sharon and Leo are going to need someone steady while I get through this." "They will have that," I said. "I will make sure of it." She nodded once and looked back at her coffee. Then she said, "There is one more thing." She told me about the restitution. The total she owed to the IRS to the family and colleagues who had contributed to the Carol Chandler Scholarship Trust, believing it was real to the Harmon Room for the inflated billings. Marcus had given her the full number. It was more than she had in savings, more than she could access through any normal means with Julian's assets frozen and the house sliding toward foreclosure. "If the house goes under," she said, "I lose whatever equity is in it. But if there was a home equity line against this property..." She stopped. I could see how much this cost her. How many times she had probably rehearsed this conversation before settling on the version where she simply said the plain thing. "I am not asking you to pay it for me. I am asking if you will put this house up as collateral so I can access a loan and pay it myself. I would pay you back, with interest, whatever terms you want." The kitchen was very quiet. I looked at my daughter, 38 years old. No clipboard, no performance, no angle. Just a woman sitting at my kitchen table in the December light, asking for help. The only honest way she had ever asked me for anything in her life. I reached into my pocket and took out my phone. I opened the banking application. I found the home equity section, Carol's house, the one we had bought together in 1988. The one I had kept warm through 20 years of living in it alone. The figures were right there on the screen, clean and straightforward. I found the application button. I placed my thumb over it. The phone buzzed. A text from Danny. 4 words. "Don't do it, Dad." I read it twice. Then I looked up at Valerie. Her face was working very hard to stay neutral and not entirely succeeding. Because underneath everything she had trained it to do, it was still the face of the girl who had pressed herself against my arm in a hospital corridor 20 years ago and sobbed until her whole body shook. I thought about Danny that afternoon in his garage when he had looked at me across the oil-stained floor and said she used my name. The quiet fury in those 4 words. The years of watching that were behind them. I thought about the voice in my own head, the soft, reasonable voice that had cost me 20 years of my life saying she came to you. She is trying. What is a house worth if not this moment? That voice was persuasive. It always had been. It knew exactly where I lived. And then I thought about Carol. Not about the ring, not about the fund, or any of the things done in her name. I thought about Carol herself, the woman who had sat at this table for 31 years, who had understood in that particular way she had exactly what each of her children needed, and exactly when giving it to them would help them, and when it would only delay something they needed to feel. She had never confused love with rescue. She had known the difference in her bones. She would have known right now which this was. I closed the application. I set the phone face down on the table. Valerie's breath released slowly. She had been holding it. "I cannot put Carol's house up for the consequences of what you chose to do," I said. I kept my voice gentle. I meant it to be. "That is not cruelty. That is just the truth of what this is." She nodded, slowly and with something in it that was not quite resignation, but was close to the nod of a person who asked for something they already knew. Somewhere underneath that they were not going to receive, and who is now doing the harder work of accepting the answer, rather than arguing against it. "I know," she said quietly. She did not push, did not escalate, did not reach for another angle the way she would have done without thinking a month ago. She simply sat with it. That told me more than anything else she had said since she came through my door. "Sharon and Leo," I said. "Whenever they need to be here, they come here. That door stays open. Whatever they need from me, they have it." Her eyes went bright for a second before she blinked it back. "Thank you," she said. She left 20 minutes later. I stood in the doorway and watched her go down the porch steps. The same steps she had been sitting on when I found her, and get into her car without looking back. Not from anger, from a kind of dignity I had not seen from her before. The dignity of a person who has asked a hard question, received a hard answer, and chosen to carry it without making it someone else's problem. I watched her taillights disappear around the corner. Then I went inside and called Danny. "I did not do it," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "Then I know, Dad. I could tell from the 4 seconds between when I sent it and when you would have called if you had." I laughed. A real one, short and sudden, the kind that surprises you. "How did you know she was here?" I asked. "Sharon told me," he said. "She asked her mom to go." I stood in my kitchen thinking about a 16-year-old girl who had stood up in a room full of adults 3 weeks earlier and said what needed saying, and had done it again tonight quietly from a distance in a way nobody would ever see or applaud. That, I thought, was entirely her grandmother's doing. After I hung up with Danny, I did not turn on the television or the radio. I poured 2 fingers of bourbon, the good Tennessee whiskey Danny had given me last Christmas, and carried it to the living room where I sat down in Carol's wingback chair by the window. The fabric on the arms had worn thin where her hands used to rest. I had never reupholstered it. Some things you leave exactly as they are, because changing them feels like losing the last proof that something was there. I picked up the photo album from the side table. Carol's album, the green one with the water stain in the corner from a party in 1991. I opened it to the middle the way I always did. There was a photograph from Thanksgiving, maybe 1990. Carol at the kitchen counter in a green apron, laughing at something just out of frame. She was 38 years old, the same age Valerie was now. I had looked at that photograph 1,000 times. That night, I finally saw what was in it. She was not performing. She was not managing anyone's impression of her. She was just standing in her kitchen laughing at something real, completely unbothered by whether anyone was watching. That was what I had spent 20 years trying to rebuild. Not the dinners, not the venues, or the catering. Her. The quality of a person who is fully present in their own life without needing to produce it for an audience. I could not buy that back. I had tried the only way I knew how, and all I had done was fund a performance of it, while the real thing stayed gone. Let me speak to you directly for a moment, because I suspect some of you have been sitting in a version of this same chair. If you have been the one who paid and fixed and showed up and still ended up at the table by the kitchen door, ask yourself the question I waited 61 years to ask. Am I loved here or am I just useful? Those are not the same thing. And the sooner you find out which one is true, the sooner you can stop spending what you cannot afford to lose. I got up from Carol's chair, crossed the kitchen, and sat down at the head of the table for the first time in 20 years. It was just wood and age, but it felt like a man coming home to something that had always belonged to him. That Christmas was Danny, Ruth, and me. Simple food, the good dishes, no agenda. The best one I could remember. And then came the following November. The turkey went into the oven at 7:45. I had Carol's recipe on my phone photographed from her handwritten index card. The winter after she died, blue ink, slightly faded grease stain in the corner. I had been up since 5:30. Not from nerves. Something quieter than that. I set the table with her good dishes, the white ones with the blue border we had used maybe a dozen times in 31 years, because she always said they were for special occasions. Today qualified. Ruth came through the back door at 8:15 without knocking, looked at the oven, looked at my phone and said, "Wrong temperature." "The card says 325, Juma," I said. Carol changed it every year and never updated the card. Ruth said, already turning the dial. 350. I watched her do it for 30 years. You could have told me before I put it in. You did not ask, she said with the satisfaction of a woman who has been waiting 60 years to say exactly that. She tied on the apron by the stove and took over my kitchen without ceremony. I made coffee and got out of her way. Danny and Chloe arrived at 11. Chloe Barrett, 31, easy smile, the unhurried ease of someone comfortable walking into rooms for the first time. She shook my hand, then hugged me instead, which surprised me and felt entirely right. Ruth appraised her in 4 seconds and handed her a bowl of potatoes and a peeler. That was the whole of the welcome, and Chloe understood it perfectly. Sharon and Leo came at 11:30. Sharon hugged me hard, looked up and said, "You look better, Grandpa Arthur." Leo grabbed my arm and announced he had been thinking about the turkey for 2 weeks, which I told him was the correct approach. Sharon noticed the 7-place settings and looked at me. "I left room," I said, "in case." She went to the sideboard, brought the wooden candlestick and the linen runner, and arranged them at the head of the table. Not the uncertain guest chair. The head. Leo came back from the living room carrying the small clay turkey he had made in 3rd grade and given me as a gift which had lived on my bookshelf ever since. He set it beside the candlestick without saying anything. I stood at the edge of the kitchen and watched my grandchildren decorate my chair. My eyes stung. I did not pretend otherwise. "Go check the turkey," Ruth said from behind me, her voice slightly thicker than usual. I went. We sat down at 12:30. Halfway through the meal, we heard it 2 quiet knocks at the front door. The table went still. Sharon set down her fork. Leo looked at his sister. Ruth looked at me. I pushed back my chair and walked to the door. She was on the second porch step, holding a pie dish, with both hands, wearing her everyday coat, the one that had taken the shape of her from years on the same hook. The pie smelled like apples and something that had gotten slightly closer to the oven element than intended. "I made a pie," she said. "The crust caught a little." "Come inside," I said, and took the dish from her hands before she could hold it like an apology any longer. The kitchen paused for 2 seconds when she appeared in the doorway. Then Sharon was up from her chair and across the room, arms around her mother, before anyone else moved. Valerie closed her eyes and held on, and her whole body exhaled the way a person exhales when they have been braced for a long time and have finally been told they can stop. Leo looked at the pie in my hands. "Is that part burnt?" he asked, pointing at the darkened edge of the foil. "Yes," Valerie said, and laughed a real one, short and sudden, cracking through everything she had carried through that door. "I am aware." "I like the burnt parts," Leo said, and went back to his turkey. Danny hugged her brief firm 1 second longer than casual. Ruth crossed from the stove, took the pie, examined the burnt crust without expression, and said, "The inside will be fine." Then she put it on the counter and went back to work. That was the whole of her welcome, and everyone understood it. Sharon pulled out the chair beside her own and looked at her mother. Valerie sat down. The meal was not seamless. I want to be honest about that. There were moments when something tender surfaced and the table backed away from it. But there was also Ruth making Danny choke on his cranberry sauce, and Leo negotiating his pie slice before dinner was technically finished, and Chloe asking Valerie about Sharon's school with the kind of attention that made Valerie's face go quiet and real. Near the end, Valerie came around the table and stood beside my chair. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was unsteady, and she was not trying to fix that. "For all those years, I never once said it. I never even saw it." She pressed her lips together hard. "I am sorry it took losing everything for me to understand what you were doing. No but. No favor attached. Nothing owed." "I forgive you," I said. Her face crumpled completely, not the managed kind, the real kind. Sharon appeared at her back. I stood up and put my arm around my daughter. For the first time in more years than I cared to count, it did not cost me a thing. They left, the way families leave gradually in stages with coats and leftover containers, and one last conversation at the door that ran longer than anyone planned. Leo went out asleep on Danny's shoulder shoes, untied the clay turkey tucked under his arm. Sharon hugged me twice, the second one tighter. Chloe said dinner was the best she had eaten in years, and she meant it. Ruth was last. She stood on the porch with her coat buttoned and looked at me the way she has looked at me since we were children. "You did right," she said. The same words she had said outside the Harmon room a year ago, standing in the snow. "You already told me that," I said. "I know," she said. "I am telling you again." She squeezed my hand and walked to her car. Valerie found me in the kitchen while the others were gathering their things. She stood beside me at the sink without needing it to be anything more than that. 2 people in the same room. A long way still to go, but here today, together. "Same time next year?" she asked. "Same time next year," I said. After the last taillights disappeared around the corner, I washed the dishes, put the leftovers away, and left Leo's clay turkey on the table where it belonged. In the living room, I turned off the one strand of lights I had put up around the window frame. Carol had always done exactly that one strand, nothing more. I had spent 20 years not doing it because I was too busy funding other people's celebrations. I stood in the dark for a moment. The house was quiet and full at the same time. If that speaks to something you have been carrying, tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Hit like, subscribe, and take care of yourself tonight. You have earned it. That is my family story. All of it as honest as I know how to tell it. I spent 61 years being the man who kept the lights on and got the chair by the kitchen door. I called it love. Some of it was. But I want to be straight with you the way I wish someone had been straight with me 20 years ago. Do not do what I did. Do not wait until your heart is strained and your name has been on other people's contracts for 2 decades before you finally ask, am I loved here or am I just useful? That question is worth asking early. It is worth asking out loud. I believe God gives us the people we need, and sometimes He gives us the hard seasons too, because that is the only way some lessons get through a stubborn man's skull. Mine took 20 years. I hope yours takes considerably less. These grandpa stories are not just mine. I hear from people every week who are carrying the same weight, different names, different tables, same kitchen door. If this family story reached something in you, I want to know about it. Leave me a comment. Tell me where you drew your line or where you are still standing at the edge of it. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you are not subscribed yet, this is your sign. There are more grandpa stories coming. More family story chapters that I think will stay with you. One thing before you go. Some of the stories ahead contain fictional elements built with the purpose of exploring real human truths. If that is not what you came for, that is completely fine. Choose what serves you best. Thank you for staying until the very end.